While it's front of mind to ask all the folks who have their phones with them to please turn off your ringers. And if your computer is on, to turn off the chimes that might come in when you get a new email. My name is Ken Levinson. I'm the Executive Director of WIDA. Don't worry, Senator Coons is on his way. I'm sure he'll be walking into the room at any moment. We're going to get started with our event in just a second after a little quick commercial about WIDA. Thank you all for being here. This is the second to last event we're doing before our annual dinner, which takes place on July 17th this year. If you haven't seen it in your inboxes, we're pretty much sold out with sponsors, but we hope to have many of you there. We're going to be honoring this year Chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Grassley, as well as two members of the Ways and Means Committee, Jackie Walorski and Suzanne Del Bene. So we hope to see many of you there for that event. In 2 weeks, we're also going to be hosting the Chairman of the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Trade, Earl Blumenauer, to talk about his agenda for trade. Obviously, a lot of the things that maybe we'll be discussing today will be some of the topics that will be discussed with tariffs and trade, and certainly USMCA. Very, very pleased to have Senator James Lankford here with us today. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us at WIDA. It's a great honor for us to have you. We are the membership community for the trade community, and we have many different sectors and people represented here. I know you saw the list. These are people who work on trade every day and are very anxious to hear about what you have to say and your views and thoughts on the trade agenda. And special thanks as well to Nicole Bivens-Collinson, a WIDA board member, the new treasurer of our board, so we're very grateful to you for everything you do. And I guess you're now an MSNBC star, having recently... MSNBC. So thank you so much for joining us, Nicole. Thanks for all your help with this event. Turn it over to you, and when Senator Coons gets in, we'll just slip the line on the side. All right, thanks.
So thanks a lot, and again, thank you, Senator Lankford, for joining us, and we're looking forward to having Senator Coons. We were very pleased to have these two gentlemen because they are known, I think, by all of us at least, as two of the people that can work together, reach across the aisle, and try to get things done, and actually function in the Senate the way that it should function. And so we know that you've been active on some of the issues with respect to the trade policy that's happening right now. So we wanted to give you each an opportunity to give us your perspective, talk about what you're seeing right now, and then from that we'll have an opportunity for the audience members to ask you some questions, and hopefully we can find a path forward together.
Oh, I hope we can. I'm hoping by the next dinner that you have that this is all in the rearview mirror. It's like, good, everything all got worked out, what we were worried about, it all got resolved. We'll see. Good morning to everybody. Let me say some nice things about Chris before he gets here, so I won't say nice things in front of him. Chris Coons is a terrific partner to be able to work with us. He works very hard on the trade issues. He works very hard just as a senator. We work together. He and I co-hosted the National Prayer Breakfast together last year. We worked together on a personal level and on a Senate level. And I want to say that to you, not to just brag on Chris, that he can tolerate a redheaded Republican. Which, by the way, he used to be a redhead, so bring that up to him, by the way, as well. So yeah, and he has a redheaded son to prove it. Chris and I can work together not only personally, we'll work together on hard issues to try to find where do we have common ground. And you'll hear the term a lot of time, let's compromise together. And that term has become so toxic that I've really locked in on, okay, 80% of the things we agree on, that is our common ground. Let's try to knock the 80% out, and then we'll go argue about the 20. But let's at least get the 80% done, and let's keep going as we go from there. That is a different perspective, because you'll hear people say, well, 80% you like and 20% you won't. Really, I'm looking for the 80% we both agree on. Let's move on that and to be able to keep going so we can make some actual progress. Chris is someone who actively works both sides of the aisle, doesn't care where the good idea comes from. If it's a good idea, let's finish it. And so he's a terrific partner to be able to work with on that. So now I can say mean things about him when he gets here. So let me say this to you. Thanks for your engagement on this. Don't lose heart. We're all pushing, and there are multiple folks that are pushing on the trade issues. I like to remind the folks at home, because I have lots of trade conversations at home back in Oklahoma as well, of all levels, and I have folks say, and Oklahoma is in the dead center of the country. How big of a trade issue is that in Oklahoma? Well, we're actually the northernmost port community in Oklahoma. Everybody loses track of the fact that Mississippi and that whole port system and lock and dam system actually ends in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So all of the grains that come from the Midwest and the fertilizer that moves north and the chemicals and everything else all end around Tulsa, Oklahoma, either coming into that port, going south, or coming up from that port, going north all the way through the Midwest. So trade is a very big issue for us, and our engagement worldwide is very significant. Our number one partners are Canada and Mexico. So the NAFTA/USMCA agreement is a very big issue to us, but we also have a lot of engagement in China as well, and in multiple other countries, Japan, lots of other places. Produce a lot of pork, a lot of beef, a lot of wheat, a lot of soybeans, a lot of chicken. We go through a lot of finished products, but we also have engineers and designing that actually happens in Oklahoma. The LED lighting in this room, in all likelihood, was designed in Oklahoma, but it was manufactured in China. And so that company that does the engineering and the design work based in Oklahoma is looking at what's happening now with their manufacturing base and the threat that they face from manufacturing and the tariffs that are coming in. As you know, lighting products are popular products in a lot of places like Home Depot and Lowe's and Walmart and Target and Costco and on and on and on through that as a home issue, but it's also for commercial construction as well, especially the LED products. And that's what they really focus in on, and have been one of the lead designing and engineering groups for that. So they face those issues. So we get it, and we walk through these issues similar to what a lot of other people do. I remind people at home when we talk about trade that we as a nation have been free traders before we were a nation. In the Declaration of Independence, one of the complaints that Thomas Jefferson and that whole group wrote into the Declaration of here's the reason we're leaving good King George. One of the reasons was he is inhibiting our worldwide trade. That is one of the statements. So before we were a country, we were free traders. That is built into our DNA. And so what I'm trying to be able to encourage not only the administration, but people that talk about trade one way or the other say, this is who we've always been. We've always, as a people, reached out to the rest of the world to be able to open up trade, and it is a good thing when we do it. So I know you'll have specific questions, we'll walk through it, but let's talk dialogue from there.
Okay, so I think one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of the perception that the administration is not understanding that the toe bone is connected to the foot bone, which is connected to the leg bone, which is connected to the ankle bone.
Right.
And so when
It
we're
eventually gets to the neck bone.
and then you're gonna lose your head.
Yeah.
Or it explodes. So when we're talking about that, we have companies who, even though you ask them, how is this impacting you? Like, oh, it's no impact on me whatsoever. But then when they start looking upstream, they suddenly realize it. How is it that you think the tariffs could be changed in a manner that would, or if they could be changed in a manner, is there a way that would make it more effective? Because I think a lot of folks agree something needs to be done to get their attention. But how would we do something like that?
So I have on Wednesday mornings, I have a meeting with Oklahomans. We call it Java with James. I know it's cutesy. But they'll come by on Wednesday mornings for about an hour, and just any Oklahoman that's in town. And yesterday, we're just having dialogue and talking through some things. There's about 40 people there. And one of the folks said, what are we doing with China? Because my company is one of the companies that China has stolen our intellectual property. We went over there, we started producing, we had to be able to share some of that IP, and then it wasn't long before another facility showed up and was doing the exact same thing, and then they've run us out of business, and now we're out. So, ladies and gentlemen, the infamous Chris Coons. Hey, you want to grab that mic right there real quick? Because I don't share well with others. It's great to see you, Chris.
Great to see
Look me up. I gave you a fake mic, actually. So let me finish this question, and good to see you, brother. So the issue they face is we do need to confront the issues of intellectual property and other issues with China that are long-term issues that 5 presidents in a row have tried to be able to address. Their concern is how do we get to resolution, and how does that actually get solved? I made a statement last week that got a little bit of nudge. It was actually in a private conversation, as if those actually exist in Washington, D.C. There was a private conversation that when the president threatened to do a 5% tariff on Mexico, we don't deal with immigration. In a private conversation with the administration, I said, I think the president's trying to solve everything but AIDS and climate change with a tariff right now. Well, that trickled back to the president, and he called me on Saturday, and we had a great conversation about it. And he knows where I stand. We've talked about it multiple times. There is a place for tariffs, but it's not every place. If we have high tariffs that we're facing for another country, to be able to push back and to say, we want you to feel what we're feeling all the time. That's entirely appropriate, but it's working down to get to the bottom. 2 years ago, I sat down with the president and with Lighthizer and with the whole team and asked a simple question: where are we trying to go with the tariffs? Where are we trying to get to? His response was rapid and it was clear. We're trying to get to low and no tariffs. If we can negotiate to get to that point where we have low or no tariffs, that's the end goal. But right now we're raising tariffs to say, we're trying to get people's attention to say, let's get to the table and negotiate so we get to low or no tariffs. I have reminded the administration of that conversation now for a year and a half to say, if that's the goal, I'm with you. That's where we need to get. But getting to low and no tariffs is much better than to say we're going to have reciprocal high tariffs, or that we're going to keep a tariff on and just say this is working well for our economy, and so we're going to leave it on because that's a short-term gain.
Great.
Yeah.
Senator Coons, thank
Good
you.
morning.
Glad you were able to make it.
I sang a song at the beginning and opened everybody up, so it's your turn now.
I'm familiar with how that feels. It's a great way to start a morning, to have James sing a song and open everyone up. It is great to be with my dear friend, James Lankford, Senator from Oklahoma. Some of you may think that real friendships are uncommon between Republican and Democratic senators, and they sadly are. But if you invest the time, if you get to know somebody, if you listen to their concerns and values, it is still entirely possible for us to reason together to find areas of common purpose. I may have slightly different reasons to critique the president's recent actions and tariffs, or see it slightly differently, but I think we are very well aligned in terms of the longer term goal about, a fair trade world of low tariffs, and where we are competing successfully, and where our home state industries, from agriculture to services to manufacturing, are more competitive. But I am simultaneously glad the president is taking China's innovation mercantilism as seriously as he is, and making it the top of the list and being aggressive and assertive and unyielding in it, but gravely concerned that he has found a club, unilateral tariffs, justified however, 232 national security or 301 or using IEPA, and is swinging them around fairly wildly in ways that are now hitting both our core allies and straining our relationships, and that is imposing significant costs, supply chain costs, input costs, market access costs, on American farmers, manufacturers, and consumers. Our president mistakenly and repeatedly asserts that China is paying tariffs as if all this is doing is generating revenue for the U.S. government. American consumers and farmers and manufacturers are also paying increased costs. And so there's just a few key issues I want to make sure we clarify. I'm grateful to have the chance to legislate with James, with Senator Lankford, so that we can have an exclusion process that allows, if it's round 3, if it's round 4, folks from our states and every other state who have a legitimate, focused, narrow, relevant reason to seek an exclusion to have a predictable process to do so. But at the higher level, I am concerned that a weapon of economic conflict that had gradually been reduced in its prevalence and breadth over 7 decades has now been unleashed, and it will be harder and harder for us to explain to allies and adversaries alike why breaking WTO rules, why imposing tariffs as a tool of political as well as economic policy is unjustified or inappropriate or destabilizing. So we've gone from, look, we've had tariffs the entire history of our nation, as this room knows better than anyone else. It's the major source of income for the U.S. government before the income tax. But since the Second World War, and then increasingly in the last 30 years, I think the United States has done better and better through a more and more open global economic system. There are tens of millions of middle Americans who feel their future was stolen or sold away through international trade deals. And while we can have a long economic policy argument about is that true, how is it true, in what ways is it true or not true, and we can and should make a better argument for fair trade, we have to recognize the reality that it moves the politics of Oklahoma, of Delaware, of our country, and of most of the developed world. And so re-engaging in the issues that have made our middle class lose hope for their economic future, and dealing with some of the actual day-to-day aspects, whether it's access to health care, the opioid crisis, taking unemployment insurance and making it reemployment insurance, figuring out how to make apprenticeships part of everyone's life. There's a long menu, but we should be on a bipartisan basis doing the things that make our economy and society more resilient to the shocks of the 21st century and the globe. The single best thing we can do in a trade confrontation with a rising China is to fix what's not working about our own society and politics first. Second, to engage our allies who have a similar set of values and priorities. And third, to find ways to partner with China so it is clear that we do not intend to prevent the Chinese people from being leaders on the world stage. And only then come up with a clear and well understood menu of things where we are willing to have a confrontation if necessary, but to compete on fair and reasonable grounds as much as is possible. That strikes me as the trajectory I hope we're going to be on, and one that I will count on James for persuading our president to follow.
Let me mention some of the exclusion process. Going to do that. Chris brought up the exclusion process. This is something he and I worked on a lot. It's quite a few meetings that I've had with the president and with Robert Lighthizer and with Wilbur Ross on. Obviously, the 232 is on Wilbur Ross's side on that. All the 301, that's USTR has responsibility to be able to do that. The first two tranches for the exclusions went exceptionally slow, and now it's time for them to be re-upped. Chris and I just put a letter over to USTR to say, hey, those that had the exclusions in round 1 and 2, automatically renew them when they get to the end. Because they're overwhelmed. They've got a lot on their plate. Obviously, we're having trade negotiations worldwide with just about everybody right now. So there's a lot happening. They don't need to divert a lot of attention to trying to renew what's already there. Just renew them. Is a straightforward message that we have. It's entirely appropriate. Renew those in 1 and 2. For round 3, they had initially said round 3 is so big, we're negotiating with China right now. We think we're going to get through this quickly. There's no reason to do an exclusion process for round 3. And we've said, absolutely not. Round 3, you have got to do an exclusion process on that. I've had multiple dialogues with the president. The president agrees with that, and he has given clear instructions to Lighthizer based on our conversations to say we're going to do an exclusion process for round 3, and they've initiated that already. Their statement is, we'll be faster next time. I've also reminded them it's 4 times larger than the previous 2 rounds. It's hard to be faster when you've got so many more there in the process. But our focus is to make sure the 301 process does have exclusions that are in the middle of it, and it's done quickly. And just renewing rounds 1 and 2, we think would be a big asset to them to be able to get more time to focus on getting round 3 done.
We are completely aligned on this. I am from a very small state. We only have 900,000 people. The number of companies that we've heard from...
We have that many people in Oklahoma City.
...that have asked us for help with the application and the process. If that level of concern and activity is going on in states like Texas and New York and California, and I'm certain it is, then this exclusion process is going to be a needless strain on our economic growth if it is not automatically ready.
To that point, I think that there's one of the things that I saw is if I were an American entrepreneur and I was competing with products that were coming in from China, and I saw that someone made an application for getting an exclusion, and I knew that I produced that product, but I couldn't satisfy their needs because my full capacity or whatever, I would take that year and I would invest in myself. I would build up my capacity, and then I would say, look, I can now meet your demand, and it maybe presents opportunities. So I kind of see it as it's a signpost to U.S. producers or entrepreneurs as an opportunity, but they have to take that time, make the investment, and so I think it's going to be interesting to see sort of how the phase 1 and phase 2 go through.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is, and I haven't had the opportunity to be able to meet everybody here on it, but on the manufacturing side, I've yet to meet a manufacturer that's doing manufacturing in China that is not currently exploring other places they can do manufacturing. The other side of this has been how many companies have said to me, we realize we're too exposed in China. We'd always thought the risk would come from China, by the way, not from our own government. But we realize we're too exposed, we produce too much in China, we've got to look for other places to do production. Now, they're not talking about pulling out entirely, but they're talking about diversifying their logistics and to be able to find other places they can do some of that manufacturing as well.
I think that's a a big point because a lot of companies are looking at that. One of the things I want to turn to now is you all did work very hard and introduce legislation that was mandating that the administration undertake what you had requested that he do in a report that accompanied the funding appropriations measure that reopened the government, which they ignored. And so by putting it into a mandate, it's a sign that we're trying to deal with this. I know that there are other pieces of legislation that have been introduced looking at other areas where the president, where Congress has given the president the authority to take certain actions under certain conditions. What is it you're sensing might be coming up with respect, because I know 232 is one where there seems to be a little more agreement, but what about with respect to 301? And where do you sense that you might be able to go on that in taking back some of your constitutionally mandated powers?
Well, I'm a co-sponsor, I believe with Kane and Carper, of a bill that would pull back a fair amount of our congressional authority simply by requiring a within 120 days approval. And I believe this covers both 232 and 301. And the goal here is to simply say to the president, you found a club, you've been swinging it around fairly widely. We cause needless harm to our trusted, close relationships with countries like Canada, who took enormous offense at the idea of a national security justified steel and aluminum tariffs. We think Congress ought to have some role in reviewing and approving what is essentially economic warfare. And in a number of ways, this parallels actual military conflict. Congress has allowed its constitutional role to be taken over by an increasingly powerful executive across a very wide range of authorities. And this strikes me as an important place for bipartisanship and to send a strong signal, whether this president or the next, that Congress intends to be more actively engaged. And the agility, forcefulness with which tariffs have been applied and their lasting impact requires the other political branch to be actively engaged.
So what's interesting is when the debate came out and it was in the House and the Senate about the 232 tariffs specifically and determine whether they're going to try to be shut off with a motion of disapproval there, that failed to get the veto-proof majority to be able to go through the House and the Senate. But on the day that it was done, the president even tweeted out that day that this issue about national security and the breadth of the executive branch's authority in national security, he is willing to go back and to be able to look at legislatively to be able to fix. But it was kind of a, not today, but if we're going to talk about long-term fixing this, then yes, I'm willing to be able to do it. And Pat Toomey has really led the way in some of this, that I'm on that particular bill in 232, and it does the same thing that Chris is talking about. It is stepping out and saying, yes, you can engage in national security, but you have to have congressional approval to be able to do it. Now, it's a constitutional responsibility that the legislative branch has to be able to work with, trade with other nations. So I think that's clearly a constitutional action, but it's also a good check and balance. You can't leave something undefined to say anything you declare as a national emergency is a national emergency, and you can take an action from there. So I think that is something that can be done, especially on this issue of what's a national emergency, and try to get some engagement. Real national emergencies wouldn't have a problem getting Congress engaged in it because everyone recognizes this is a national emergency and we can actually lead to. We just got to get some definition on that as we work through.
So speaking of the national emergency, we just went through a very tense period where there was a threat of using the national emergency declaration to justify imposing 5%, 10%, up to 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico. One of the biggest problems that I see with this, and I've said this before, is I don't see that the president backing off of that 5% tariff produced any winners. It just produced not losers. Because we all were still, we didn't lose our shirts, but we definitely lost our shoe. So part of this is, how are you seeing this, the relationship also not only with China, but with respect to what's going on with Mexico? And I've heard that the administration feels very confident that they're going to get the USMCA done by July. So I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are on how this might move.
Yeah, we'll start first.
I try not to laugh in public, but the idea that they are very confident the MCA will be done by July, I find amusingly optimistic. Our founders designed our system to be slow-moving. It is overperforming at the moment. But, on our current trajectory, we are sliding towards either a government shutdown or a CR on our appropriations process. The idea that something as politically fraught and complex as the USMCA is going to get sort of quickly ratified, I think is optimistic. Your characterization of this, will he or won't he, right up till the last moment, Mexico tariffs, waving around a one-page secret agreement. Look, in the 8 years I spent with a global manufacturer, all I came down here and said was, give us predictability, give us predictability, give us predictability. Tell us what the rules are, tell us what the rates are, we'll figure it out, but don't keep changing it. I can't imagine a greater source of unpredictability in the business environment than a president who wakes up at 3 a.m., starts tweeting attacks against random people, and then decides, I'd like to impose tariffs on a close and trusted neighbor as a way to achieve a political objective. James may not share every element of that characterization, but there is something important here to take a hard look at. Almost every law we've passed for decades has a national emergency exception or a national security exception. I think the reason the president used her 232 powers to go after Canada was Congress couldn't stop it. I don't think it was imagined that a president would use national security justifications to achieve economic ends against two countries with whom we have had peaceful, positive, sustained relationships for generations.
There was that war of 1812.
Which wasn't started by the Canadians.
I know, but we burned down their capital, they came and helped the British burn down ours, so.
There was a lot of ugliness.
Yeah.
And we're still sore about it. In fact, anytime you're at a dinner in Ottawa, they will gladly remind you of our repeated unsuccessful attempts to invade and occupy Canada. We really need a bipartisan vehicle to reconsider this tool. Because the unpredictability it is causing is profoundly concerning to everyone I've heard from in business. How are they supposed to plan? How are they supposed to price? What does this mean for the next quarter, the next year, the next decade? We, unlike China, enjoy the support of a global network of alliances rooted in values. One of the most important things we can do is to reinforce that it is those values that are at the center of our priorities globally, and then be sustained, fair, and predictable in how we advance them. China currently has, client states, nervous neighbors, folks who trade with them, but do not enjoy the same global support. This episode has strained some of our most important alliances in lasting ways. And while I understand the objectives the president's trying to achieve, and in some instances share them, I'm gravely concerned about the tool, the timing, the lack of process, and then how is this used by future presidents.